evening and welcome to our weekly markets review brought to you by SG Futures. Today is Friday, the 11th of December, and we're just past the European cash close at 4:45 p.m. GMT. We're going to do our weekly markets review in two parts this week. So this is the first video looking at one of our core European indices that we trade, the DAX30 in Germany. And this has come from quite a number of requests from some followers out there who've got onto us on Twitter asking us could we do a bit of a review of the DAX. So for those who've requested it, here you go. So we start very similar to our US markets review. We start on our daily candlestick chart. And each of these candles that you see in the chart is a daily cash session. So we have from our all-time highs over here, dating back to the 20th of February this year, right up to today, which is Friday, the 11th of December. And coming into this week, what we've really seen over the last sort of 10 or 15 days is we've seen a degree of balance within this particular market. And we've marked out a couple of areas that we deem to be important. So on this particular blue trend line over here, we've had a touch of the trend line here, which is from the 3rd of September. And then over here, dating back to the 23rd of November, this is where price action is starting to interact with the trend line again. And it's breaking above, it's closing below, breaking above, closing below, breaking above, closing below. But all the way along, what's been a really important area for this particular market is the box marked out in green. And this corresponds to this particular gap over here from Friday the 21st of February into Monday the 24th of February. And this marks the beginning of the coronavirus sell-off. And what's really important and really interesting when we look at this particular market is we've had a number of touches into this particular gap and we haven't gone all the way through. So the closest we've come to closing the gap was on Thursday the 3rd of September, and we got up to a high of 134.69-ish, and we are probably about 50 handles out from closing the gap. So we've had an attempt at closing the gap back then, and since then we've had quite a significant sell-off down to around 11,500. Importantly, it corresponds with this bottom of the gap over here, and we had a brief look below and that acted as support down here. We had a look below and fail, and that's a real bullish sign that we're going to probably trade higher. So this particular candle from the 30th of October told us that there's a good opportunity we're going to break higher. And this is the start of all the positive news around the vaccine and this particular set of green candles that have pumped the price action all the way up here. And as we've come into this week, we've broken above the trend line, and when we look at Monday, we opened below the trend line and we closed below the trend line in a red candle. And on the Tuesday, we opened just above the 20-day moving average, and then we closed right on the actual trend line itself. Then on Wednesday, we broke above and we had an attempt into the gap, and it was marginally higher than this previous touch over here from the 30th of November, but not quite as high as this particular first touch over here, which is significant, which tells us that this is a failure inside the gap, and it is likely that we're going to break lower. And that's exactly what we've seen. This particular shape of candle should tell you all you need to know about it. Then on Thursday, we have opened above the trend line and closed dead on the trend line. And then this morning, we've opened on the trend line and we've had a significant amount of selling, a real risk-off tone across Europe, probably due to Brexit or whatever, and things have sold off quite significantly. We have touched the bottom of this balance area. We haven't taken out any lows over here, which tells us that maybe this is potentially a failure down here, but when we get in and look at the market profile structure, it's going to tell a slightly different story. So without further ado, let's try and get into that. So here we have our market profile weekly chart. So each of these market profiles or TPOs is a single week's worth of trade, and the one we're particularly focused on this week is this particular week of trade in here, and we can see how trade has performed over the course of this week. So what I have marked out on this particular chart is the top of the gap from the previous chart, at 134.94, and the bottom of the gap, which is 134.23 and a half. We can see earlier in the week we explored into this area, and since then we've sold off and printed lows today, which is Friday the 11th. We've printed lows down here, and we've closed inside the lower half of value for the week. So this tells us that potentially next week this is going to be an area of interest, because over the past 3 weeks we've been in balance. So this particular profile in here, dating back to Monday the 23rd, this one here for the week commencing Monday the 30th, and then this week in here, this week for Monday the 7th of December. And each of these grey areas has value overlapping. So this tells us that this is a fair price to do business, and that value is relatively unchanged over the course of each of the trading sessions. Albeit today we've had a significant break lower, and we will note that the value area low for this week corresponds to the actual weekly low of the week commencing Monday the 23rd of November. Again, that's significant. So this tells us that we are likely to see coming in next week. Now, depending on what sort of risk news might come out at the weekend, if the market were to open in 5 minutes' time, we would initially be thinking that this would be potentially the new value area down here, and this is where we would start to fill out some prices to the downside. We would be coming in with a little bit of a bearish narrative on this market. And there's a number of reasons why we'd be a little bit bearish, which we'll get into now in just a second. What is worthwhile noting down here, and we've marked this off on the next chart, is we have some single prints. And these single prints correspond with the vaccine news pump. So this dates all the way back to Monday the 9th of November. And this box in here, which we will just quickly shade, this box in here is a full set of single prints. And this was all of the excitement and momentum around the news of the Pfizer vaccine. We will note that the low of today, which was just above 13,000, a smidge over 13,000, did not explore into the single prints down here. So this would be a potential target for next week. If we open within this particular value area up here, we may see softness on the Sunday night futures leading into Monday. And if we open in the lower half of this value area down here, we would expect that we're potentially going to fill out some of these single prints down here. And as always, how we treat single prints are how far do we explore into them, and what is the behavior of price when it gets there. Does it reverse halfway? Does it reverse immediately? Or does it go all the way through and start to fill out value down in this area down here? So these are the things we're going to look for as we come into next week. Alternatively, we may get some bullish news around a vaccine or lifting of restrictions or anything like that. We may start to test the bottom and the top of the gap. And I feel that the next test of this particular gap, I think we take it out and we start to break above 13,500. I do believe that there is unfinished business down here to be done first. And that's just the initial sort of thoughts as I look at this particular market. When we break that down a little bit further, each one of these TPOs in here is a daily profile. So we can see dating all the way back to the vaccine pump on the 9th of November that we can see these single prints marked out, and they're marked automatically for us on the chart, going all the way down to 127.36, and I think they go all the way up to 13,051 half-ish. And we've explored a little bit into the single prints so far, and today we have failed at the very bottom, and we haven't taken out this previous low from over here from Friday the 13th, which is significant. From a value point of view, if we look at the start of the week, we filled out some, so this is Monday of this week, so we filled out some value, which is previous overlapping value from the previous Friday and the Thursday, and that continued nicely into Tuesday of this week. Then on Wednesday we had the value break higher. We explored a little bit into the gap, and then we failed and closed in the lower half of value. Closing in the lower half of value is telling us that we're potentially going to see a little bit of a bearish day the following day. So on Thursday, lo and behold, we've had our bearish day and we've had a little bit of selling in here, albeit we didn't take out the lows from Tuesday, and we actually closed inside of value. So whilst we don't have overlapping value, we pretty much have value area high corresponds with the value area low from Wednesday, and we closed inside value, and it kind of tells us that the market is still making up its mind. It's still very much in balance. And then coming in this morning, we opened right at the very top of the profile, so this is the open here, and we sold off hard pretty much for the duration of the AM session this morning in Europe, and we have since closed inside value here. So coming in next week, it's unsure what narrative has changed. I suppose across Europe there's been increased lockdowns, there's a lot of nervousness around Brexit, how much the EU is going to give versus what it gives to the United Kingdom, and maybe there's just some uncertainty around what the outcome might be. We would treat this weekend as a bit of a risk event, in that there is potentially likely to be some Brexit news coming next week. So this could be the risk off from that that may play into next week, depending on how the talks go over the weekend. So immediately we're thinking, depending on where we open next week, if we open in the lower half of today's value, I think there's every opportunity that we start to explore these single prints down here and see where that takes us. If we open inside value, we will wait and see if we break into the lower half of value from this week. So depending on where we open up from a weekly point of view, and we will then make a decision on how much of a risk-off sentiment there is and how likely we are to sell off and start filling in these single prints down here. So ultimately, we have contained within this box is what we would call balance. This is a sideways market pretty much for really the last 2.5 to 3 weeks, and the market is probably waiting for more information, and when it gets too high it sells off, and when it gets too low it rallies. And what we're waiting to see next week is, do we break out of balance and do we break lower from here? So if we want to use our market auction theory rules against this, if we take the high up here and the low down here of the balance area, we have this at 474 points roughly. The rules state that if we take that amount to the downside, that these will give us some potential price targets for us to look at. I think I've marked these out already. So 125.13.5 corresponding with a value area high over here before the vaccine news hit the markets. So that would be a really important area that we would look at, and that's if we get all the single prints filled out and we start to fill out value down here, and also there's a gap as well between the Friday and the Monday. So again, these are really significant levels. I don't know if we've got enough momentum to take us down here, but these are some potential downside targets. Alternatively, we could look at this to the upside, and if we take our 474 points that we target the 13934, and that will well and truly take us into the gap, into and above the gap that already exists. So these are the type of targets that we would use based on the rules from a balanced market. So there are a couple of nuances that we want to look at in the daily profile today that will lead us more towards the bearish narrative coming into next week. So let's go in and have a quick look at those. When we get into our daily DAX profile, we're not going to get too much into the weeds around the remainder of the week, as you've already seen it. We're going to specifically look at what's happened today, which is Friday. And what we can see here is when we go up to the very top and into A period and the open, that we opened up here at 132.66. We had a brief look higher and only 5 contracts traded across those two prices. Granted, the DAX is a thin market if you've ever traded it, and we sold off very heavily in A and B period. So we have a huge initial balance that's printed all the way down here to 131.33. Now, what is significant in this is We have the fairest price to do business, which is the volume point of control in here at 131.53, which corresponds to the low from Monday the 7th. And that is significant. That would be a significant, if we break above that level next week, that's a level we're going to carry forward, 131.53. If we break and hold above that, then our bullish narrative starts to look a bit more positive for the remainder of the week. One of the other areas that I believe to be significant is at the lows. And when we get all the way down to the lows, we have, for any market profile aficionados out there, we have a poor low. So given that the DAX is such a thin market, you get a much greater probability for decent excess at the bottom and top of profiles. Given that we only have one tick of excess in here, that's a sign that this particular auction is likely to be incomplete, and we're likely to see a correction or a repair of this particular low down here. So this corresponds nicely with a nice round number of 13,000, a number that the DAX has really struggled to resolve over time, and it's spent a lot of time kind of trading above and below and breaking higher and breaking lower. And I think that there's a good probability that if we do get back down here, that we repair this poor low down here and explore some further levels down here. What we have noted is that we have closed inside of value for this particular day. So it's a sign that there is a decent amount of value to be had between buyers and sellers, between the value area high and the value area low. It is somewhat contributing to our bearish narrative that we have closed below the fairest price to do business, which is 131.53. So barring no major catastrophic news events coming out over the weekend, maybe a little bit of uncertainty around Brexit, we would come in with leaning towards a 70-30, leaning towards being bearish coming in on the week, depending on where we open. So opening outside of value for the week, in the lower half of value for this week, we would suggest that we are going to start exploring lower and exploring into those single prints. If we open higher or in the value area for this week, I think there's a good opportunity that we'll then go and retest some of the highs and hopefully explore into the gap. So thanks so much for watching. We'll be along later in the weekend with a full review of the E-mini S&P, NASDAQ and Russell 2000 as usual. If you want to know more about market profile, visit our website sgfutures.com and subscribe to one of our courses on there. Otherwise, hope you have a great weekend.